Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51% show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, outrage from women's activists as Russia moves towards decriminalising domestic violence. Also, as the rate of childless women continues to rise in Europe, we talk to Monika Queisser from the OECD about what that means for the developed world. And we meet a rarity in Sudan, the female car mechanic who now runs a garage. But we begin in Russia, where parliamentarians are moving towards decriminalising some forms of domestic violence. Already the bill has passed through the first stage of approval in the Russian parliament. This despite government statistics showing some 40% of all violent crimes are committed within families, while thousands of women are being assaulted by their partners every day. Our team on the ground in Moscow sent us this report.
A desire to preserve the family. That's how Russian legislators are explaining their proposed law. Conservatives believe parents should be able to physically punish their children.
It can sound scary when we speak about hitting, but we're talking about violence which doesn't have consequences for health, and even violence without violence. In the Russian family tradition, parent-child relations must be built on the power and authority of parents, which can't be substituted by any other authority.
In effect, domestic violence, said to be without serious consequences, will be depenalised. Yet Russia's legal system already offers little support to the victims. 2 years ago, Natalia's partner beat her up so badly she grabbed hold of a knife to defend herself. Lightly wounded, her partner phoned the ambulance and the police. He was taken to hospital. Natalia, covered in bruises, was taken into police custody.
I tried to speak to the paramedics. I told them, "He hit me all over, I've got a headache, I don't feel well, and I can hardly stand up." They just said, "Look at what you've done."
Natalia was later diagnosed with traumatic brain injury and concussion. She's now under investigation for premeditated aggression and faces 10 years in prison. Her aggressor has never been convicted.
I asked the investigator if he thought it was possible to kill someone by punching them. He said of course it is, but for us the right of self-defense works only if a pistol is put against your head.
Those who defend the victims say this isn't an isolated case. In a Moscow suburb, Alyona set up a refuge. On the second floor of this house in the countryside, 5 rooms are set aside for women and their children. Some of the victims are waiting to receive legal and medical help. They too are confronted by the slow response from authorities.
Not long ago, a woman was killed even after phoning the police 6 times, and that's not out of the ordinary. Today, a woman has to look out for her own safety. She's alone against everyone, against her family, who stop her making her problems public, against the police, who tell her she has nowhere to turn against her aggressor, and against her friends as well, who make her understand that her husband beats her up because she's a bad partner and a bad mother.
To protest against the trivialisation of violence, Anastasia goes out into the streets wearing makeup. It's an isolated protest that goes almost unnoticed.
In our society, violence towards a woman, like violence in general, is the norm. We live in an ultra-militarized society where it's more shameful to be beaten up than to beat someone up.
For those defending women's rights, the new law on domestic violence will only serve to make the critical situation even worse. In Russia, more than 70,000 people are reported as victims of domestic violence each year. The real number is higher, as more than 70% of victims suffer in silence.
Now, French researchers have discovered that women in southern Europe are increasingly not having children. In fact, the rise in childlessness is most marked in Greece, Italy and Spain, with rates surpassing 20% among women born in the early 1970s, and that compares to an average of 15% in Northern Europe and 18% in Western Europe. And it's a trend not just confined to the south of the continent, with figures showing that 1 in 5 women in Britain are reaching their mid-40s without having children. Now, joining me now in the studio is Monika Queisser, who's the head of Social Policy Division at the OECD. Monika, thanks for being with us. These figures are truly interesting, but what is driving this trend?
Well, there's a number of causes why women are not having children anymore. One is because they decide to try much later. And then often, if you push the date out too far, it becomes more and more difficult to have children. And that is one of the explanations why we're seeing more and more childless women. But there's also chosen childlessness. Now, chosen childlessness can be for various reasons. It could be economic, because you feel that you don't have enough resources to establish your own home and you cannot offer the child the future that you would like to have. But also it could be because the cultural expectations in some countries are still for mothers to stay at home, to stop working, to stop going to paid work, working at home, and devoting themselves entirely to their children. And this is something that increasingly well-educated women might not want to do. And then there's another factor also, which I think is quite important as well, is that many women say, I just haven't met the right mate. And
it is really important, isn't it? And we tend to underplay that.
That is an important point. And I think it's this, again, is a mixture of reasons, because women are more and more well-educated. They go to higher degrees, they make more money, and they often expect that the man in their life will then be somebody who makes even more money and is even better educated than they are. And that often means that the air is thin. There's not that many around to meet, and also it takes a long time to get to that stage in their professional lives. So if you take all of these factors together, it's not very surprising that it does play a big role.
What is going to be the impact for OECD countries?
There will be fewer and fewer active workers to support a rising number of pensioners, with consequences for the finances of our social protection systems, for our tax systems, for provision of long-term care. Long-term care for people who are frail elderly are mostly still being provided by family carers, and that's mostly women. So what we will be seeing is a lot more pressure on our social support systems, but also we will have to see more women and more men taking part in those tasks, because it cannot just be done by women.
Are governments aware of this trend? I mean, what are they doing to counteract it?
What countries are doing is a number of things. For example, they're increasing retirement ages to make people who are in the labor market stay longer and pay more contributions, and make sure that more money comes into the coffers. That is one of the areas they can do. They're also, in some countries, trying to influence fertility rates. Now, that's much harder.
How do you do that?
Well, that is the big question. Some countries are trying to encourage people. In Japan, there was just a new initiative and campaign trying to tell people to go home earlier from the office and spend more time with their spouses to have more children. There's publicity campaigns, but obviously one of the things that many countries are realizing works best is to provide better childcare, to provide better combination of work and family life, and help people with more flexible work conditions to actually do both. And that might help and entice more people to have children.
Do you think, however, it receives the high priority that it should?
I think that many countries are really now catching on because they're worried. They are very worried about population aging, about not being able to sustain these demographic changes which are coming. Now, one other possibility to help aging populations is to allow in more migrants, because they're usually younger. Often, at least initially, they have higher fertility rates, but then quickly adapt to what's going on in the country. But obviously, migration has a whole host of other challenges, and we see that in many countries, there's a lot of political pushback against allowing more migrants into the countries, and which in turn may propel even stronger support for domestic family policies and encouraging people to have more children.
Monika, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To Sudan now, where although a transitional constitution guarantees equality, yet in reality the situation is somewhat different. Still, there are beginning to be changes. For instance, the number of girls enrolled in schools has increased in recent years, while some women are even opening their own businesses, as Julia Seeger reports.
She's breaking stereotypes like a boss. 27-year-old Sandos Ahmed is the only woman to run her own car repair shop in Sudan. And not only is she the owner, she's also involved in the day-to-day running of the workshop. She knows everything there is about engines and cars.
This is a macho society. This work is difficult. It isn't easy, whether with colleagues or clients.
Sandos comes from a small village in the western part of the country. When her father passed away, she had to provide for her 6 siblings. So she moved to the capital to study mechanical engineering. With time and hard work, she earned respect in a man's world.
This female mechanic was brave, and I believe she can achieve a lot in this field, because she is very good.
Today, Sandos manages 6 workers and trainees. They come into work after she's checked the cars and has outlined the work to be done.
We got this car 2 days ago. It needs panel beating, full painting. We also need to change the front and back shock absorbers, springs and bumpers.
Sandos says her business is doing well, despite the fact that many Sudanese still don't acknowledge women entrepreneurs. Sandos is just one of many other businesswomen in Sudan who are fighting for equality and female empowerment. One of their main obstacles remains access to financing.
And that's it for now. And if you'd like to comment on what you've just seen, you can head to our Facebook page. That's France24 51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. Thanks for your feedback so far, and please do keep those comments coming in. So until our next show, bye for now.